Hello, I'm John Furrier with Dave Vellante for episode 113 of theCUBE pod. Dave, a busy day here on Wall Street, record highs, salute to you.
How you doing, buddy?
And see you next week for sure.
Yeah, I'll be there.
We got the big
Can't
AI
wait.
Factory event. It's Climate Week, so it's going to be a UN international crowd. Tons of big names coming in NYSE. Of course, we're pumping out content in the future of data centers. I was just a little bit late for the CUBE pod because IBM's in the building. So ringing the closing bell. They just closed the market. Great to see IBM winning a big awards for sustainability. So I was down there a little schmoozing, saw some of the IBMers, but also it was quite an event. The historic nature of IBM and the stock exchanges story. Tom Watson was into sustainability before it was fashionable in the 60s. He was very, very big leader. Of course, Climate Week is next week. Great stuff.
I didn't know that. Watson was
apparently I heard the speech downstairs from the account manager for IBM. Been on the account for 25 years. They have an account manager for their listed company.
Wow, that's sort of the nuclear age, and when there was a lot of negativity around anything that was nuke. Interesting.
They were into sustainability before it was a thing. But it's just a great story. Tom Watson is legendary, obviously, history of IBM. But it's funny the way they talk about IBM being an old company. And I was like saying to Sarah Maron, who was there, head of comms, senior vice president of communications. I said they forgot to leave out one of the best performing stocks on Wall Street. So they're, the history's there, but they're kicking ass. We'll see how their earnings continue. If the Arvin comes back on the cube, we'll see. But yes. It's all good. It's going great.
I want to get to the news, but
it's just unbelievable news this week.
Yeah, I want to get to it.
Obviously, NVIDIA.
Well, that's a big news.
Putting $5 billion into Intel. I just got to go right into the red meat here. $5 billion investment. NVIDIA makes an Intel to create a joint CPU, GPU chips for both data centers and PCs. Pretty strategic, given that the U.S. government percent ownership.
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on that. I really do think it's a win-win-win, right? I mean, definitely a win for NVIDIA. This is actually the subject of our breaking analysis this week. I mean, you want to go through the deal points first, John, or is that kind of redundant? You got me?
Yeah.
Want to go through the deal points?
Yeah. Well, let me put my headset back on.
All right. So the scope of the partnership is that Intel and NVIDIA are going to be developing joint custom chips that fuse x86 with NVIDIA GPUs, but really CUDA is really the important piece here. And the target is both data centers and CPU. In the data center, it's x86 with NVLink fabric. And then in PCs, it's a jointly developed system on chip, SoCs, with Intel x86 and then RTX GPU chiplets. And they claim it's like $150 million units opportunity annually. As you said, NVIDIA is investing $5 billion into Intel, so they get stock, and that's good alignment. And they claim that the market opportunity is 25 to 50 billion in data center and CPUs today. And I think that's in this. They're talking about chip markets. I mean, the overall market's bigger than that. But their whole thrust here is get the best CPU, the best GPU integration. And I tell you, John, to me, this is like a huge win for NVIDIA. It further signals the passing of the baton to the new era, to the new leader, which is clearly NVIDIA. And so, I mean, our estimate is that it expands their TAM. They put in $5 billion, it expands their TAM by $500 billion at least, and it expands Intel's TAM too to probably $100 billion. So NVIDIA is the big winner. Intel's a winner. I think
everybody wins. There's losers. Who are the losers? AMD, ARM.
I see AMD as potentially a loser. I got some thoughts on that. I don't see ARM as a loser at all. I heard, I think Kramer talking about that. I'm like, how is ARM a loser? NVIDIA is based on ARM. ARM is like, helps NVIDIA get to tape out so fast with TSM. So ARM is definitely not a loser. TSM is a winner. ARM is a winner. AMD, I think AMD is going to get access to the instruction set. I think they have to give AMD access to that, either government push. I just don't think it's fair. If they don't get access to that, that's going to be a problem. And then I think it's going to be interesting. The hyperscalers, on the one hand, win because it means more business for them because everybody's doing AI in the cloud. The flip side of that is, I don't know if they're going to get access to the instruction set. So it's going to, potentially, big competition for their own internal chips. And so I think they're going to have to continue to do more business. But the bottom line here, John, is this expands NVIDIA's moat, in my view, because not only, remember, NVIDIA doesn't have a big PC business. Its biggest business is the data center. So this gives them access to the PC business. And as well, it gives them a bridge into enterprise. As you and I have talked about, enterprises aren't gobbling up NVIDIA chips. It's all going through the cloud and the big hyperscalers and neocloud. So this bridges and fuses x86 in a hybrid with CUDA, and then does the work to do the software compatibility in the same way that AWS made it easy to migrate to ARM with the software. Same thing with Apple, with software compatibility. And so big win for NVIDIA, big win for Intel, although they still got the foundry to deal with. I'd love to talk to you about that because there's really not much here for foundry. Maybe a little bit, it's clearly a boost in volume with the SoCs, but still they got the foundry around their neck. But big win for NVIDIA, big win for NVIDIA, big win for Intel, win for customers because now they've got that hybrid architecture. And I think it's just a win for AI overall.
I think this is such a huge win for NVIDIA. You nailed it. The moat just got massive, right? Because our whole thing about the moat was CUDA, and they got the two-sided marketplace. This actually, in my opinion, takes pressure off CUDA because now they can continue to pound away at CUDA as a competitive advantage. DeepSeek basically came out of trying to get around not using CUDA. So some say there's a lot of overhead involved in CUDA in the industry, the insiders. But this deal absolutely gives them data center access. Totally love that point. It also saves Intel in the data center team. So
Totally.
and so Intel solidifies their position. So it's almost like a horse trade here. We'll trade this for that. NVIDIA gets the nestedness now by putting NVLink chips and interconnects in the data center with Intel. It's essentially like a, probably the wrong side analogy, but when Bill Gates saved Apple with that investment, remember? Apple went on a thundering tear. Now, I think good. Well, I think NVIDIA is not Microsoft going the wrong direction, but I think the gift to Intel for the $5 billion and with the product integration, this is hardware stuff. This is networking. That's what the data center needs. We cover hyperscalers up and down. That's the key access to the operating system. NVIDIA gets nested in there. So that once they get nested, it's gonna be hard to pull them out, unroot them. The inimitability is going to be so great. And also it's a sign of the era of the new architecture we've been covering on theCUBE Research and SiliconANGLE, which is the new data center systems that we're going to cover next week with our AI Factory series kicking off, is that it's kind of like the new motherboard, right? Remember the old PC days? Like you had, the buses, and you had the chipsets, you had the architecture, memory architecture, IO, all those subsystems. Okay, that's a simple example, but when you go large scale, NVIDIA's nestedness with Intel, it's almost like making a data center baby in a new way, right? It's like you put them both together, and this could be a major step function change in the competitive advantage for NVIDIA, saves Intel, so Intel plays ball with the gift. I think AMD is going to be stuck because they have to up their GPU game and then also compete on the data center side, which they have a good presence in. So it does put pressure on AMD. I don't think AMD is going to lose, but I think it's just game on for AMD. Now, the wild card in all this is the U.S. government, because the chess move here is NVIDIA puts $5 billion in. Well, guess what? They're on the cap table. So is the U.S. government, Dave. And so with the China stuff going down, what are we talking about here? American company. So a little bit of gamemanship there. Some say it's currying favors. I don't think so. I think it's a strategic move by NVIDIA to make a play and saying, look, we're going to help Intel. And we love Intel. So I'm happy, actually, and Lip Dutan's in there. He's on the cover with Jensen, two big guns in the semiconductor industry, kind of like OGs making it happen. And if you go look at NVIDIA, we interviewed the founder of Nextlet this week. He was doing innovation there in the early 2000s. They were a small company. Look at where they are now. They just basically saved Intel. Okay. They're the king of the hill. No doubt. This is it's so many storylines here to unpack, but I just gave you my top takes on those. But I think the unwritten story here is this is a competitive advantage for NVIDIA, to your point about the moat, but specifically in the data center where these components matter in the new architecture. And I think we won't even see the fruits of that probably for at least 12 to 24 months. But when it does, it's going to be probably faster, and it takes the pressure off CUDA, right? So it just makes CUDA on its own great for NVIDIA. So I think the moat just got more diverse and deeper.
Well, no doubt. And from Intel's perspective, it's $5 billion of cash on top of roughly $9 billion from the Trump investment, which, by the way, is your and my investment, our US taxpayers, which, by the way, we also made money on that deal because its stock was up, pretty significantly. It's like a meme stock now. And so this gives Intel AI relevance with developers and enterprise IT, and the CUDA access. I think you're right. I mean, it just solidifies CUDA as the standard. And as negative as I have been on Foundry, this at least stems the decline in x86 volume. We know that Foundry's volume is dominated by Intel. That's the only wafer scale company, a customer that it has. So this stops the bleeding. It maybe even with the SoC increases the volume. They still got to figure out Foundry. So that's, I think very positive. From AMD's standpoint, I mean, look, Lisa Su is an exceptional operator. I give her a lot of credit there, and they're going to continue to grow in x86 for the next couple of years. But you go out to 27, 28, it's like, okay, if they don't get access to that CUDA instruction set, then they could be relegated to the bronze medal behind Intel. The ironic thing here is that AMD was always the
bronze medal. That's a tough one. I'm not sure that's true.
Well, think about it. Well, NVIDIA is the gold. This is my point I want to make. Historically, AMD has been the second source, the plug compatible manufacturer to Intel. Now you've got Intel, ironically, as the second source to NVIDIA. So you got Intel as NVIDIA is the gold, Intel vying now for the silver because of CUDA, and that could push AMD down. Now, I think what's going to happen is AMD will get access. The government will maybe force them to get access. I'm sure NVIDIA would be happy with that. The more the merrier, as long as they're the king of the hill. But if they don't get access to that, the CUDA instruction set, what are they going to do? They're trying to build out their own software. They're going to have the open source software. Okay, we'll see how that all plays out. But CUDA is rapidly becoming the standard.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we should track the metal standards, because it's worth tracking, because I think it's a new dimension we should definitely start following. I still think AMD will be a silver medalist in your calculations, but we'll see. But I mean, I think if I'm AMD, I think AMD turns on the heat. I think it's time for them to turn up the volume on their real GPU position. I've been talking to insiders inside the NYSE wire community, the CUBE communities, our communities. And it's like AMD hasn't taken the gloves off yet. So I would not be surprised. They're all related, all these companies. Yeah. AMD CEO is related to Jensen. So they probably, they see each other at family picnics. So I think AMD wins. So I'm not.
How do they win? What's the scenario there?
I think they turn up as a supplier to the neo clouds. I think AMD increases their quote public um, amplification of their real GPU, XPU horsepower, and it's going to come down to cost and scale. I was talking to a guy this week where we were talking about DeepSeek, and the success of why DeepSeek ran on all those old GPUs is because they were trying to reverse engineer and run large scale without CUDA. It turns out CUDA was the bottleneck to all the success. So DeepSeek's innovation was because they wanted to eliminate CUDA from it. So it turns out when you take out the overhead of CUDA, you can actually run the equivalent horsepower and scale on older GPUs. So what that tells me is that there's a configuration or architecture of equipment, processors, chips, interconnects, fabrics that could actually, if configured properly, could be just as cost effective and scalable as the big, latest and greatest Blackwells and the latest and greatest super chips. And it's a stretch, but that's a scenario. I think we talked about 2 pods ago. We kind of riffed on that, white box, blue box kind of thing. I see Arista doing the same thing at the investor meeting. There's a big demand for what they call blue boxes, meaning custom built networking. So there might be kind of this new assembly of stuff to craft and build equivalent NVIDIA systems. Now they got CUDA, which makes their stuff look better, but if it's overhead, I mean, when I say overhead, I don't mean like overhead, but it's the fact that DeepSeek works on lesser stuff proves that they took CUDA out. And that's not well documented, but that's the insider's perspective, is that Chinese were trying to reverse engineer.
So play this out. Play this out with me. So then that would require either some open source CUDA-like standard to emerge, right? Or AMD develops its own, CUDA-like standard or CUDA-like capability, which they would probably open source with libraries, et cetera. So what's the time frame, the probability? I mean, open source, can catch up over time. So we know there's open source initiatives going on. I mean, all the hyperscalers would love it. Everybody would love it if there was an alternative to CUDA that emerged. I just feel like CUDA is so far ahead.
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell, but if costs are going to be a big factor, like we've been covering on the enterprise side, they don't have the CapEx. And if the CapEx party ends, okay, then it's a difficult solution from a cost perspective. So the only natural thing that will happen, in my opinion, is engineers and entrepreneurs will figure out how to build the equivalent price performance into the system. We saw that with the Wintel Moore's Law wave, a little bit different, but similar. It got smaller, faster, cheaper on every revolution. So, my thinking is that's going to happen here. Now, that's why I'm looking at the Open Compute Project Summit, OCP, because that's going to be where all the kind of components are, if you will, for lack of a better description. When I say components, I don't mean like just chips. The rack standards, what people are doing for power, liquid cooling. I mean, all these things now are into the design side of these massive data centers. And so the CapEx game is very relevant. And at the same time, if you're NVIDIA or AMD, the CapEx will dry out, because if you look at some of the spend happening, for instance, the $30 billion Oracle deal that OpenAI did, or AWS, I was talking to an insider who's actually building these factories, these large scale systems. And the inside baseball on that is that the Amazons of the world who've been doing this and with the large scale data centers, they know exactly what they're going to build for the first 9 to 12 months, almost to like an 80-90% accuracy, meaning they know what they're going to use that capacity for, so they budget for it. It drops down every year out. It drops down on the probability of will they use it. So all these contracts are backloaded. So they literally aren't as big as people think. So people think, oh, 30 billion, then a bag of cash shows up. No. They're not even putting up the waiting list money. So the risk is being taken in on the real estate side, is being taken in on the bank side. The neo clouds are arbitraging the price spread between the signed contract and the money from the banks. So I think there's going to be a really interesting dynamic of like what is actually really realized on the CapEx from a revenue standpoint. The market thinks it's great. Look at the orders, the backlog. Well, if I don't build that data center in North Carolina, the $30 billion data center, that's, doesn't get
Well,
built.
well,
Then
look,
someone's holding the bag on that.
to your CUDA alternative scenario, I mean, there are some open source standards. We know that, but there's a bunch of them, and they're sort of in their narrow use cases. You know, maybe one will emerge. I know there's some stuff in HPC. I know some of the frontier model vendors have used some alternatives that have been pushed by AMD, and they've got some supercomputer chops. Intel, was doing some stuff there. Maybe they'll bag that now. So
It's not clear yet. It's not clear yet. My point, it's not clear yet. But here's what I would say on that, because, the open source community will actually tell them what to build. And I'll tell you right now, I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that the enterprise AI factory story will happen. There will be AI factories, big and small. Remember, Avi Mehta from 2010, refineries, that big data is as the new oil, and he used that metaphor of refineries. Well, guess
Yep.
what? You might need some big refineries or factories, but remember the edge. Edge computing could be a little mini data factory, right? So, there's going to be, a decoupling of the models from the data layer, and then a decoupling of the app layer and the models. So these data centers, or these data factories, or AI factories, excuse me, data factories I want to come to in a second. These AI factories will be big and small. Now, one insight this week from my interviews is that you can't have AI factory without a data factory. Think about that. So we actually I missed this in my analysis of like, what is an AI factory? I've been so focused on the chips and the systems and the networking that you actually have to include that assumption that all AI factories, Dave, will have a data factory built into it, right? So a new element to our series for sure, but like, yeah, they'll be big and small, but I don't think there's going to be that many big ones. Yeah, you have the big monster data centers being built out. Some will get built if there's capacity. Power will be limiting everything. But I think the enterprises will have these AI factories, and they'll be small, medium, and large.
Yeah, and remember David Flynn said one time, these enterprises, they'll pay to 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 they'll pay money to save money, from integration, whereas the hyperscalers would throw engineering at the problem. And so I think, in my view, this deal increases uh, the probability that CUDA, well, extends the disruption time frame from some of the open source. I think it lowers the probability that CUDA gets disrupted. I think it's further solidifying its standards. One other thing I want to say, I want to give David Floyer some props. He and I did the breaking analysis today. And June 29th of this year, breaking analysis number 282, Floyer shared this with me, and I put it into our breaking analysis. Intel should partner with NVIDIA to develop AI, mobile edge, and PC and workstation devices using NVIDIA's CUDA standards, and developing a new architecture, hybrid that supports, Arm x86. I mean, it's not exact. He didn't call the investment, but directionally it was right on. So kudos to Floyer for that prediction.
Yeah, another prediction gone right. It's good when you can look back and pat yourself on the back when you get those right. But I think the market still has to understand this, and this is why I love the market right now, because even if this market doesn't grow as fast in certain areas for certain companies, the value extraction is going to be with the AI side, right? So this is all enabling the AI. So I'm very bullish on it, Dave. I got to tell you, I think the enterprise is going to have not only just a continuing resurgence, and what's even great is that our favorite area, the data center and cloud and storage network and compute, is still the hottest thing, right? It's the hottest thing in Wall Street. I mean, here on the show floor in New York, the bankers, they're going gaga over AI infrastructure, chips, data centers. It's kind of like a pinch me moment.
The Grok raise. Holy cow.
Yeah, Grok, NYSE Wired, player who we know, got a challenge point from him at the Raise Summit. He sent me a note. 6.9 billion.
billion and a $7 billion valuation.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. Nice. Um,
Yeah, there we go.
so, well, just to close out on Intel and NVIDIA, I agree, totally agree. It's a win. It's a win all around. It's good for AI. I just wish they would do something with Foundry and get that over with. But I think there's egos involved. I think it's complex. I think the Intel board obviously wants to get value out of it, which I don't think there's a lot of value there that they're going to be able to extract initially. And I think unshackling the design team at Intel would just be an awesome thing. They could do more deals like this. They could do stuff with RISC-V on the edge. They could lean into ARM. They could partner up with TSM. Yeah, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. So,
Yeah,
but good
the
news.
hell will freeze over when that happens, right? We'll see. You never know. I mean, they could just one
Well,
day wake up and say, "Let's do it."
this was a surprise to a lot of people, me included, and I totally agree with your analysis. It's a win all around, and giant win for NVIDIA, big win for Intel. Kudos to Lip Bhutan for taking action, and good win for customers. I think it's a neutral to a positive for ARM. It's a positive for ARM, and it's by the way, more great news for TSM because they're going to be making more of this stuff. And a little bit of good news for Intel Foundry, they need it, but not game changing for them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a weird market as this AI comes in. The question is going to be the AI infrastructure, but there's a lot of other good news are going around. We had a bunch of videos this week, Dave. Next week, our AI Factory series, climate change. Meta had their big event with the glasses. The demo didn't work. Turns out it was a DDoS attack. Sarjeet had a great story on that. It was unbelievable to see the demo fail. We've all seen those demos. Even Steve Jobs had failed demos many times. People always show the successful demos, but this whole glasses game. I heard Amazon's going to come out with one. They got an event here in New York City coming up, so we'll see what that is. OpenAI says they're going to have a device because John Ivey now has this deal over there. Very interesting IoT opportunity.
Talk about demos. Bill Gates had way more failed demos than successful demos. In fact, I can't remember a successful Bill Gates demo. I think every one I ever saw failed. And he was like, well, next time we'll get it to work eventually. It was classic.
So I got to get your take on the story. So CNBC's reporting sources that XAI raised 10 billion at a post-money valuation of 200 billion weeks after reportedly raising 10 billion in debt and equity at a $150 billion valuation. Elon Musk buys X, creates an AI, buys a bunch of GPUs, goes down to the financials and saying, I'm going to be worth all this money. Now, how bubblicious is that? I mean, who would have thought Twitter would turn out to being like a major, fundraising vehicle for Elon Musk? It's unbelievable.
Oh, he's got that new proposed pay package, which
he's the first trillionaire.
Talked about it, right? He's the first trillionaire. He's got to get the company's value to 10 trillion, I think it is. And the way he's going to do it is he's going to combine, XAI. He'll leverage Tesla. He'll leverage SpaceX. The Boring Company, all his assets. He'll bring them together in some way, shape, or form. I mean, the guy does some remarkable things. I know a lot of people don't like him, but you got to admire his ability to innovate. It's just insane how this guy does it. He's off the rails with his whole Trump thing and him going back and forth, and now he's down on the U.S. government and can't be fixed. He's probably right about that, but I mean, just the problems he goes to attack are just ridiculous, and what he's doing now with robots, with Optimus. I mean, it's just, he's deep into that. He says it's going to be harder. Well, maybe not. Is it going to be harder than, I think he said it's going to be harder than shooting rockets. Maybe not. Maybe shooting rockets is harder, but
I mean, he goes after these big projects that he thinks are going to be real, like robotics. I think is a very real. It's one of our hottest content series we got going on Silicon Angle. Obviously, cloud is always great. This whole data center on premises, AI factory is smoking hot. Demand for content there. Robotics and robotics AI is super hot because one, people love robots. It's very futuristic, but there's a huge robotics industry that's going to be lifted up by the software layers coming out with AI and all the horsepower because physical AI is a real deal. And I think it was 2 years ago, Jensen highlighted that on GTC. And then last year, he doubled down on it, digital twins, but physical AI isn't just manufacturing robotics, it's humanoids, it's cars, automotives being transformed. So I'm huge into this physical AI impact. If you look at what AI is going to impact the physical side, NVIDIA's got it all right. Their vision is right on. The convergence of physical digital worlds are here, and everything's going to be re-architected for that. And that's the common theme that we're hearing. Everything that's been data driven or IT related or old way to collect data and use it for value creation will be deleted and replaced, deleted permanently or deleted and replaced by something else. I was talking to one entrepreneur and he said software is going to be deleted on the balance sheet as an expense and then ultimately generated on the fly free. And so I'm like, what do you mean? Explain. Well, if you have a Salesforce license, for instance, or let's just say that you have Workday, you're paying for that. Okay. He's like, well, just take that cost away. I'm like, okay, that's a little bit fantasy. Again, but that's years and years away. But if you play that forward, Dave, the economics of AI is disruptive. So, that's why I'm so into this whole FinOps evolution with cloud, because FinOps was transitioning to just financial operations in general. And AI, if it takes costs out, that's helps the bottom line. That's a business benefit.
Okay, so one of the things we're working on with the Cube research, and um, and George Gilbert's leading this, is with his whole services as software model. He didn't coin that term, but he's digging into what it all means. So you remember, if you go back to cloud and SaaS, the framework that we're using here to try to understand this is there's a disruption in the technology model, the operational model, and the business model. And so if you think about SaaS originally, remember it started out with Salesforce. It was a hosted model, and remember companies like ServiceNow, they had a single instance, they had multi-instance, but it was single tenant, multi-instance, and then it evolved like with Workday into um, true multi-tenant in the cloud. So it moved from a sort of one-off complex, everything on-prem was a snowflake built from scratch versus this sort of true SaaS model. So you went from the operational model was you had these individual instances and then it went to a volume business model and then the pricing changed. Remember, it was per seat, then you had ELAs, and then it went to this cloud-based consumption model. Well, there's some similar things happening with a new paradigm in software as services, right? So there's you think the technology model, you got the data stack and the data management and the application logic, it's all coming together. The user interface is generative AI, so you're talking to the system. So it's a completely different technology model. It's like Slack meets BI with this sort of system of agency on top. So that's kind of interesting. And then the operations model is you're building to order. It's like you can reformat the assembly line using agents and you've got now differentiation, but you've still got the volume advantages. So instead of Henry Ford, one size fits all, you can actually customize it because agents can work, much more quickly and reform workflows. And then the business model, it's hard to predict, right? You got heavy compute costs up front. You're depreciating this stuff really quickly. Software is from a training standpoint is becoming a lousy business because they can't keep their moats for more than a couple of months. GPT-5 comes out, everybody copies it, DeepSeek's copying it. So that's going to be interesting to see how when that hits inference, how that's all going to play out. You got data and computer these raw inputs, the data is going to give you competitive advantage. So the business model is evolving. So everything's changing. You've said this, John. You've said the SaaS business is going to completely change. And so that triggered us to go think about, okay, well, how is it going to change? And like I said, George has led that. So we'll be essentially constructing a research agenda around this.
Yeah, and it's so important because no one has that research, right? This is like a product-led growth slash economic impact analysis. It's kind of like a hybrid. It's not obvious, in my opinion. So, but everyone I talk to, even CFOs, are looking at how to instrument the future business model in tangible assets. What's that mean? All these things are changing, and the value creation is happening fast. So the top lines are growing, and bottom lines are getting more efficient. So, you know, the economic impact of AI will be a hot topic, and it's all going to be predicated on what's under the hood. It's funny. I'm browsing SiliconANGLE right now to see how many stories we have on this topic of AI impact, and I saw a video of George Kurtz on the front page from CrowdStrike. So I wanted to ask. I wanted to start off with Todd, but I know you just had 3 days at their event with CrowdStrike, and I want to hear how that went. He doesn't do many interviews. He only sits really down with you. You're one of the only people he sits down with. theCUBE is the only one.
He's awesome. He does sit down with that. He sits down with Kramer. You know, I'll give him a lot of credit there, because after the July 19th incident, he sat down with Kramer, and Kramer was ripping him. But he did a good job. I mean, Kurtz is awesome. I mean, he's very understated. I don't know if you've ever, yeah, you've met him. You met him at RSA and before. So he basically laid out this vision of the agentic SOC. And he like Nir Zook basically says, look, security has to change. I think the difference is, Palo Alto's kind of had to rewrite its stack, and I think CrowdStrike has evolved its stack, and so that's kind of a change. I mean, both companies are doing really well, but he laid out this vision of a highly automated SOC, and he used, John, the example of autonomous vehicles, where you've got level 0 is no automation. Level 1 is like analyst assisted. You're getting alerts and recommendations, which sucks. Everybody hates it. And then you've got level 2, which is like partial automation, like prioritizing and triaging. And then the human, says, okay, do this. And then you've got this conditional autonomy. That's level 3, where the AI investigates and then responds, and then the human's still supervising. And then level 4, just like, again, level 4 level 4 self-driving, you get end-to-end responses, but the hands are still on the wheel. And then full autonomy, the SOC is 24/7, no human intervention. And we're a ways away from that, just like we are with self-driving, full self-driving.
No, there's full self-driving level 4 right now. I interviewed the
there's level 4, but not level 5. That's his point. So you got level 4, and we'll get there pretty quickly. And then fully autonomous, full self-driving level 5 is going to take some time. But then he laid out the vision, which again, I props to George Gilbert, who talked about enterprise AGI when we wrote that Sam Altman, Jamie Dimon post. George Kurtz coined the term as security AGI, where essentially you have
sentient security,
right? And so they announced some agents. They also announced an agent builder called AgentWorks. And I was asking him, like, well, why should anybody use your AgentWorks versus some generic agent builder from like Google or Amazon? And he's like, well, we got the data. We have hardcore security data in context. We can customize this stuff. They can probably customize it too. But then we got deep integration. We got governance all in our stack. So he made a very strong case for how AI is changing the game, how attackers have the advantage, and defenders, you've got to move fast, and then laid out a vision for the agentic SOC and how they're going to get there. They made 2 acquisitions, one a couple of weeks ago, Onum, which does kind of like real-time streaming pipeline and pushes the security out to the edge, which is key. And then they did Pangea, which is like observability for what's going on. It's not just observability because they can take action too. What's going on in your AI? Because there's all this shadow AI going on, and you don't know what the F is going on. And so Pangea allows you to do that. They're tucking those into their stack. The big news, which wasn't widely reported, but you could see it in the stock, they had a financial analyst day, and they have always been laying out like a $10 billion vision by 2030. Well, they're halfway there. So they laid out the $20 billion vision by like 2036. Stock had a big day 2 days ago, and the analysts all jumped right on board. So they have done a V-shaped recovery from the July 19th incident, and they're kicking ass. They're great. The last thing to say about CrowdStrike Falcon, very similar, John, to the early days of ServiceNow that we covered with theCUBE. You remember the first one we did, we were looking around, we're like, wow, there needs to be more ecosystem. And we said the same thing about CrowdStrike 4 years ago. Well, they had 8,000 people there this year. Ecosystem was coming apart at the seams. Everybody wants to be part of CrowdStrike because they have the flywheel going. Cloud native with AWS Marketplace, their own go-to-market. Now the ecosystem is exploding, and they're just kicking ass.
Yeah, it's been quite an evolution for these companies that are transforming. They have to. CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, the two leading firms. So if you're not going to be on the right side of history with the AI side, you're good. An L4 SOC would be great. But you know how hard it is, even on the self-driving cars, that I learned from my interviews with this one company that's building a L4 car from the ground up. It's hard. I mean, you have to build it from the ground floor up from day one. The Waymo, which everyone knows in San Francisco and is coming to other cities, that's an L2 with retrofit. So
Two? Waymo's
meaning,
L2? Oh, I thought Waymo was L4.
no, it's an L2 retrofitted with software. In other words, the entire car wasn't constructed from the ground up. So the company Tensor, I think it's called, they're building the entire car as L4. Remember, they're just Jaguars at Waymo with bolt-ons.
Yeah, right.
Everything's been added on, so it's retrofitted. The sensors and all the LiDAR and all the telemetry, all that stuff's built into the actual construction. So it looks different. And also the system's private. It doesn't talk to the internet. It's completely
private network.
It's private network. It's basically a rolling AI factory. Okay. And NVIDIA is involved. They're using the NVIDIA chip. NVIDIA is going to love that story when they see it. It's really a compelling story. But I mean, if you get a fender benders, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg to fix, but it's going to be a luxury item. You can be in the car. It's completely autonomous. And the entire interior and the user experience is synced to your digital lifestyle. It tells you when your meetings are. It knows when to do things. It's completely engineered for that experience. So it's also going to be priced significantly high. It's going to be priced for the luxury buyer who wants a badass, shiny new toy, literally. But that's where it's going. So we'll see.
The way Kurt's described it, I didn't know this, is that you got a control plane essentially well, the car it's its own controls, but then in the cloud, you've got data pumping up, and you got humans that can actually observe when something goes wrong with the Waymo. And you've been in a Waymo before, and it gets stuck for a minute, and you're like, come on, just go. Supposedly there's some human intervening, saying, oh, we gotta check out the situation. Here you go. And I didn't realize that. You got human in the loop with Waymo. I didn't know that. I thought you had no human in the loop. And so I asked him, is it going to be harder to get to the full self-driving in security than it is in cars? And he doesn't know the answer to that. But I know some experts that say, hey, they point out there's a reason why we don't let people drive until they're 16, because the brain has to develop. It's a learning system. And the fleets of cars need things like Byzantine fault tolerance to get to full self-driving. And so I don't know. We'll see. It's definitely taking longer than most people realize, but you know, you hear Elon talk, he says it's going to be an order of magnitude safer full self-driving than humans driving, which, you know, I hope that day comes soon.
Yeah, I want to, I know we got a hard stop, but I want to get your thoughts real quick on Andy Jassy's comments this week. Sarjeet posted again, another great post. He's looking to root out bureaucracy.
Yeah.
He
You know
was
how
at
I
a
feel about it,
conference.
you know?
Yeah, I mean,
I grew up with IDG, Pat McGovern, you know, flat organization, keep the corporate staff lean, keep the organization flat. You know, they used to force us to have, you know, 8, 10, 12 direct reports, which was a lot, maybe too many. But it was flat organization. And the thinking was push decision-making as close to the customer as possible. Flatten the organization, keep the bureaucracy, you know, down, keep the layers as flat as possible, and just keep innovating. And the downside of that was interesting because you had IDG totally decentralized, and you had Ziff, which was highly centralized. And Ziff was good; they were a really good competitor, but they were command and control organization. They had, you know, good cost, a lot of good really investments, standardization across a lot of their publications. And, you know, IDG was just thousand, you know, flowers blooming, and they were both effective. But that was the culture that I grew up in. And so I love the, as you know, the flat organization, the decentralized company.
well, we'll see. Next week should be a really strong event for us with theCUBE and theCUBE research, their AI factories.
You see Saab's text?
Yeah,
He's going to be in town. I don't know if we got room for him, but he's always.
we'll make room for him. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
got this. He's been like our field reporter. He's getting great content. He's getting good stuff.
He's kicking ass, Sarjeet. He's taken on the financials angles. He's reporting earnings. So anyway, he wants to come on Wednesday. I guess there's some small Google event next week. I didn't realize that. Oh.
Yeah, well, Dave, I'll see you next week here in Manhattan, and have a great weekend.
Thanks, John. You too. See you, everybody.
Hey, I'm playing golf, Dave, at this country club in Long Island. Never been to. Apparently, it's the oldest country club in the US.
You're gonna get. I mean, you're good in golf. You're gonna get really good if you keep playing. The weather is gonna be amazing. So enjoy.
Yeah. Well, have a great weekend.
All right.
See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.